Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the government political correspondent, and it's election time and an even numbered year. So partisan elections are coming up in the first Tuesday in November, and we've been interviewing Senate candidates, Congress, etc. Now, this interview is for State Senate, and we have the candidate, Paul Hambleton of Democratic Party, running for the Senate district is
Senate District 10.
10. I knew it was a factor of 3 of the Assembly district. So the 10th Senate district comprised of the 28th, 29th, and 30th Assembly districts, correct?
That's correct.
And it would be one of 33 Senate districts in the state. We were just talking off camera how much the district has changed in boundaries from the 90s, which is when I ran for office, and then 2000 census, 2010, 2020, and then we had the court decision that now this is really the first partisan election with the new districts.
With the new districts, right.
So tell us a little bit, what is included? Obviously St. Croix County is, but...
Yep, St. Croix County is included. A couple of townships in Dunn County over on the east side of the district, and then it's all of Pierce County. Big chunk of Trempealeau County, Buffalo County, and Pepin County. So it really starts here in St. Croix County and goes south all the way to Trempealeau County, and then the town, the village of Trempealeau, which is just north of La Crosse.
So like Spring Valley is in?
Spring Valley's in.
All right. And all of St. Croix County?
All of St. Croix County.
All right.
Yeah.
So Paul, let's talk about you.
Sure.
Okay. So where do you live? Where do you hail from? What have you been doing in your adult life? And let's just give folks some background or qualifications.
Well, I actually grew up over in Minnesota, grew up in Roseville, and not too long after high school, I went to college at Augsburg College, and went there for 2.5 years, and then I left Minnesota to go to University of Wisconsin in Madison, and never came back to Minnesota. Still got a lot of family over there. But then moved here to St. Croix County in would be in the late 70s, or in the mid 70s actually. So I've lived in St. Croix County now for about 50 years, with a detour out of the state for 7 years, when I lived in Maine for a while.
Okay.
But
now you mentioned you're a Badger.
I'm a Badger.
And what years were you in Madison then?
I would have been in Madison in the 70s and right up to 79.
Okay.
In that era.
So that was the year I was a senior in high school. So you're a few years ahead of me.
Years ahead of you.
But and I didn't become a Badger till the mid 80s, but going to law school there. So you have that in common with Eric Hovde and Tammy Baldwin, because I interviewed both of them. And
wonderful school. Loved it.
Yeah. So, okay. So what did you do then for a living, professionally or vocationally?
So I had a pretty diverse background early on. So I worked in retail for a fair amount of time, in PDQ food stores actually, down in that area. And then when we first moved back up this area, that's who I worked for too, in the Twin Cities area. And then was a carpenter in St. Croix County area, lived in Baldwin, worked as a small business owner there for several years while my children were small, helped take care of them. And it wasn't too long, I'd actually trained to be a teacher, or looked at being a teacher when I was down in Madison, and eventually decided I want to go back to that. So that's when I did go back to school, get certification to teach in K-12. And my first teaching job was in Baldwin-Woodville as a special ed teacher in elementary school.
Okay.
For special ed kids with behavior and other learning problems. And that's where I really got a start in education, and that really, that's where I ended up really building my career around that.
In the public school system?
In the public school system, that's correct.
Okay.
I went from there and I also was a language arts teacher, so kind of moved around, but in the same district in Baldwin-Woodville for about 20 years.
Okay.
Also did a little stint as an adult, teaching adults up at, for 3 years up at what is now Northwoods college. So it was WITC.
So
at the time.
post-secondary education
That
as
was
well.
post-secondary is also what I was doing, yeah.
Okay. So that's what you did for a living. And then as far as family, you know, you said you've lived here for almost 50 years.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, my kids grew up in this area. I went to high school, or graduated from high school in Baldwin-Woodville High School. Eventually, I left teaching and went to work for organizing and advocating for teachers in this area.
okay.
So I worked in, at that point, I was in Menominee and worked for school districts around the area. And there I represented teachers and support staff that worked in 22 different school districts around the area. And I did that up until would have been 2012. A lot of things happened in education during that stretch of time.
Oh, yeah.
It's a longer story, but
Yeah.
things in Wisconsin really
Act
changed.
10,
Act 10 happened, right?
Yeah.
So I was involved with a lot of those things that happened then. And I decided to leave the state and I went to work in Maine. And there I worked for the teachers in Maine Education Association, which led to another career change when I went to work for the Department of Education in Maine. And that's when I was the chief academic officer and worked in education policy at the Department of Education in Maine. Did a lot of stuff with federal programs, implementing ESEA. Also worked in the state with career and technical education, worked with subject area standards. So I kind of oversaw a whole bunch of
So you've had a
those issues there.
perspective of education both within Wisconsin and maybe how they do it in another state.
other states. And then there I really was involved a lot with the legislature and education policy, both in terms of the laws, to working with legislators, as well as with implementation through rules, regulations that come about after you pass a law. How do you actually implement? So that was a really just a marvelous experience. And in 2018, we decided to come back because I had elderly parents that I knew needed help. So that's when we moved back here and settled here in Hudson. So I live in Hudson now. And since then, I've been doing a lot of things with my family, a lot of things helping mom and dad out. Mom passed away last year, but still helping dad out. And I've been involved politically with the Democratic Party. And that's really what led to this, is at that point, this opportunity came along when the maps changed in particular, and we really saw an opportunity to step up and run for office for Senate District 10. So that's what led to this.
All right. Well, we're talking about Paul Hambleton, who is a candidate for State Senate District 10. And he just told us that a lot of experience working in St. Croix County and living in St. Croix County. So what's bringing you, obviously you've had organizing experience with teachers and then with the Democratic Party, but why are you running for State Senate?
Oh, well, for one thing, I really love this place. It's a very special part of the world. You know, having lived in other states as well, it really is a place that feels like home when you get here. My family's here, and so that's a lot of it. But it's the west coast of Wisconsin. It has a real unique, I think, culture, a unique feel to it. The people here are marvelous. The communities are wonderful. And I feel a strong sense of giving back, that I want to help build something. We're really changing here. This is one of the fastest growing parts of Wisconsin. In the 50 years that I've been here, you know, when I first moved in the area, we were really looking at quite a different place. My family then was, you know, involved with folks who were on farms that maybe were, you know, 200 acres, something like that, with 40, 50 head of cows that they were milking. Thriving small towns with a lot of business, small businesses in them. And we've seen, you know, a lot of changes to that. Farming has changed, industry has changed. We're now seeing businesses have changed to a large degree. You know, I think you see kind of a consolidation of things, so that it's really put some challenges for small businesses. You also see some environmental changes, real challenges to how land is being used.
Sure.
And all of those things to me, and as well as people moving here because they also want to be here. So our population has grown, especially, on this side of it. There still are some very rural areas in Senate District 10, but on Hudson, River Falls, this area has really, population has grown quite a bit. So there are a lot of new people here because people want to live here. So that has brought about a lot of change. And I think that's an opportunity, but it's also a challenge.
Let's talk about some of the issues that you're talking about in your campaign. What are you championing as far as, what do you think we need in this state, what direction we're going?
There's kind of three things that I'm focused on,
Okay.
and they branch out into other things. But the first is my professional life has been involved with public schools. I'm from a very bottom line. It's kind of how do we fund them, and I've seen that unfold since I was involved as a public school teacher back in the late '80s and early '90s. How as Tommy Thompson once called it, the three-legged stool, back in 1993 when he decided to do the QEO.
Right.
When those kind of things were
Revenue
there.
caps.
Pretty well informed about that back then, with revenue caps, with the state share of funding, with how we looked at all those things. And there's a long history there, so won't have to talk about it here, but it really does kind of lead to today.
Sure.
And the situation our schools are in, which is a really challenging funding situation.
So you think you've got some experience that maybe you could help in assisting and changing that
I can
process?
help work on that one. There's a lot of weeds in school funding. It's complicated, but I think it's something we need to really take a hard look at because schools aren't currently in a situation where it's makes a lot of sense. I just looked recently at what the DPI projects right now for what a referendum are going to be offered it'll be coming up on November 5th, and it looks like we're going to have something on the order of 150.
Hudson's one of them.
Hudson's one of them.
Yep.
And across the state, the last election cycle, we had 93 that went to referendum. So it's an increasing issue for property taxpayers as well. When if you look back at that 1993, the whole point was to increase state funding and protect property taxpayers. But here we are in a situation where we're right back at it. So I think it's something we really have to look at how we've done that. And it's certainly complicated because there's federal dollars that come to our schools, there's state dollars, and there's property tax. So this is something we need to take a hard look at, and I feel like I could help with that.
All right. So you mentioned three things. Education, number one. What's number two?
Number two is small businesses are really the kind of the heart and soul of our rural communities. Foxconn, big stuff is not going to save rural Wisconsin. So what can we do to to incentivize and build out small businesses? And it relates to a lot of things that I think are important to flag. In one sense, it may relate to things like daycare and elder care. How are we dealing that in our rural communities so that people can find jobs and work and have daycare for their children? And the same thing, we have an aging population in rural Wisconsin. So as we get older, are we going to be able to stay in our own communities as we age? And it looks to me like we really need to be looking ahead at that. And I think both of those are also small businesses. They create opportunities in rural communities for people to have jobs. But we also have broadband that has expanded. So there are plenty of opportunities there if we can nurture small business in rural Wisconsin. So I think there are a number of things we can do with that.
I just want to make sure I heard that right. A Democrat talking about promoting small business.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay. I think it's something that really is what helps create and build strong communities.
By small business, what's your definition of that, Paul?
Small businesses probably can get pretty big, in most people's definition. When you look at what we have here in Hudson, in fact, some of the small businesses are relatively large from the point of view of.
But are you talking like 100 employees?
Yeah, you can have 100 employees, but you can also have one employee. So I think there's a range of things that go.
Well, and that phrase "small business" has been manipulated by the different political parties, and one party who is advocating tax cuts for people making $1 million or more, we're saying that if we don't pass that, it's going to hurt small business. Do you know many small businesses that have employees making $1 million or more?
I don't know a lot of that have $1 million or more, but it could be. Those are the kind of statistics you'd really have to dig into and look at what that means. I just one of the things that I know just got floated recently was tax incentives for small business. This was Vice President Harris talked about it just the other day. Apparently there's a $5,000 incentive, but a $50,000 to move that to. I think she's talking there about small business in terms of an entrepreneur starting up a small business. So this would be a truly small business.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't want to exclude small manufacturers that might employ several people.
Yeah, sure.
So that's what I'm thinking.
Education, small business, number 3?
Number 3 is medical, access to medical. And there's, a lot of things happening in that area. It's a complex problem that we have. Wisconsin is one of, I think it's 10 states that have not expanded Medicaid. And I know we call it Badger Care in our state. And there are some complexities to how funding works in the medical services across the state, but we are leaving on the table a whole lot of federal dollars, and it's been that way for quite a while.
What's the point in not standing up for Wisconsin to get its share of those federal dollars?
Yeah, that's always been my question, and I have not gotten a good answer to it. Why we're leaving that money on the table? So that's something that would be one of my first things to look into. What we have going on right now is an ongoing crisis that we keep patching with Band-Aids. We saw it happening down in the Chippewa Valley with the closure of those 2 large facilities there. So there's a lot of consolidation going on, but it's still leaving high and dry some of the folks that are dependent upon Medicaid and Medicare. So the reimbursement rates for some of those services are lower than what you get for private insurance. And that mix of services is what allows the larger consolidated ones to operate. It gets to be problematic if you're somewhere where you're only getting a narrow band of patients that come in with Medicare or Medicaid. The reimbursement rates are not enough on their own. So that's where the complexity falls in. So how can we build a system that's going to make sure that everybody's within range of medical services? It's particularly acute in some areas. So women's health care is particularly acute, to be close to that. There are other elder care. We mentioned that a little bit before. But having long-term care facilities that are available and close enough, that's really becoming a challenge. Because a lot of that's when people don't have the resources and they're dependent upon Medicaid and Medicare, those facilities are really difficult to fund right now.
So we hear, and because of the Dobbs decision, it used to be if we were running for assembly or state senate, you didn't have to talk about abortion because there was the federal case law that was in place that protected that right. Dobbs' decision reversed all that, thrust it back on the states. And so with your number 1, 2, and 3, did you necessarily mean to avoid talking about abortion, or is female reproductive medical care part of this access to medical?
For me, it's part of that access to medical care. And I'm a firm believer that that is a decision that women have a right to make that decision. It's between them and their God and their family and their doctor. I don't think the government, we as a government, shouldn't be making that choice for people.
Okay. Well, and we start talking about both parties. This is one of the first elections I remember where both parties are trying to be the party of freedom. And we see so that word being used a lot more at both of the conventions. But do you see is personal freedoms something that is underpinning all three of these areas that you're emphasizing?
I do. I think it is. I think it's probably, we might be defining freedom a little bit different because, you know, I think I would define it more as something that, you know, I want the freedom for people to be able to make their own decisions about their medical care. I want the freedom for people to make their own decisions about what books they read. You can decide for yourself what books your child should read. I don't
so
think
you would be in favor of parental rights in terms of being able to have the option to shield their child from a particular class, curriculum, or a book?
Yeah, I think, and they do have that right. I mean, as a public school teacher myself, I taught when I was teaching English. I would occasionally get that, where parents would say, I don't want my child to read that book in your class. That's their right to do that. But it's a different thing to say, I don't want anybody to read that book in your class. I think that's a restriction.
So I'm hearing also the words mind your own business.
I would very much go along with that. And that's, you know, I think that's very much an ethos of rural Minnesota and rural Wisconsin is, you know, when we live in communities, the community is about, it's a unity of our community, really does depend on being privacy. Somebody else may have a very different belief system from me that lives down the road, and it's their business and it's not mine to poke my nose into it, and vice versa. You know, I think that is mind your own business.
Knowing the limits of government.
Knowing the limits of government, and you know, that I think that's really an essential part of how we get along, and it's another way of saying we respect each other's ability and respect one another's freedom, you know, to make those choices.
Okay. When we talk, people use the phrase, you know, fiscal conservative, but, you know, I also like to use it, fiscal responsibility. Where do you see, you know, priorities on the state's end of things? Obviously, I already mentioned about examining the expansion for Medicare so that we have less reliance on state tax dollars and more reliance and more use of available federal dollars. So what areas of the budget might you change priorities if you were to be elected this November?
Areas of the budget, well, I think obviously school would be one. I know we've acquired a surplus. That one of the challenges that I guess I've mentioned over and over as I'm talking to folks on knocking doors is that it's a puzzle to me why we had 93 schools go to referendum last year, and we're having, looks like 150 this year. Many of them just
what an increase, yeah.
Yep, many of them just to keep the doors open and keep staff in the schools and keep the rooms and the rooms clean and things going, while we have a $7 billion surplus at the state level. So that to me is there's something there that we've got to deal with. So to me, and thank goodness the last budget cycle, we did put more money into revenue sharing for our municipalities and our counties. But that also, similar to our school budgets, there's a similar dynamic there. When we get too far out of whack with what we do from the state level, it comes back to the local level. And I think we got a little out of whack with that.
One of the tools that the current party in power down in Madison has used in the area of education is to pit K through 12 versus post-secondary education. Saying we can't feed both of you, and so here's the pile of money, and kind of pitted the two against each other. Do you think that that's fruitful, or
I don't think that's fruitful at all. In fact, you can see right now if they're not pitted against each other, they're both in the swamp because the university system is facing some real challenges, and
They're basically have been getting starved
they have
out.
basically been getting starved out. Right.
More reliance on tuition. They try to do tuition freezes, and when you freeze tuition and you don't increase the state support, then massive cuts need to be made. So because you come from the K-12, does that mean that you would favor that one over the post-secondary?
No, I see them as connected, as well as I would say I'm a real big fan of also of the technical schools and the VOTEC side of things as well.
Yeah, we don't want to forget them.
Don't want to forget them, and I think that was a lot of the work, as I mentioned before, that I was doing in Maine as well, is particularly for kids, in high school and coming right out of high school. There are a lot of kids that would benefit enormously by developing trade skills.
Well, that's where the cost of college and universities has skyrocketed. That's the one area that folks have been flocking to as the vocational schools. And so you would want to do something to even further the partnerships that have developed over the last 5-6 years.
That's correct. That's correct. Because and here's why. Because I think there are a lot of kids, and I was one, because I was both. I loved academics. I loved English. I loved my college classes. But I'm also a carpenter. I love doing things with my hands. And I think there's a real interplay that happens, a synergy that happens with a lot of young folks. I saw it when I was a high school teacher. I had kids in my, a lot of the kids that I worked with in high school were kids that really struggled with reading and writing and those kind of things, but they could change the engine in your car over the weekend. They were not kids, they were smart kids, but that synergy between academics and hands-on learning for some kids is critical.
So you would look at policies that would increase the flow of students into the 1-year and 2-year programs.
Giving them that opportunity so that they can find success in something. Then often you'll see that same group, those same folks will then turn to other more academic stuff because now they get it. They get the connection between the more abstract stuff and the hands-on stuff. So I've seen that happen so many times that I really believe in that.
Well, let's talk about, you're the challenger and your opponent is finishing up his 2nd term, been in there almost 8 years. I think he started with a term that might have been vacated by somebody, but nonetheless, he has been reelected. So why are you asking voters to vote for you over him? What's differentiating you from your opponent?
I think I take a different look at a lot of things, and it's not personal by any means. So I'll say that I don't know Rob personally, but I suspect we get along just fine. I'm a hunter. I'm a fisherman. I know that is something that it's evident that that's something he values himself, and so we'd probably have a lot of things that we would bond over that way. But I think I come from a different kind of a take on a lot of stuff. I feel like one, for instance, I would talk about maybe is I've read some stuff about the bike trail situation that occurred, and I don't know if this is exactly going to be the right thing to talk about, but it's something that I've looked at a little bit, where Rob put a bill in. That was in the 2017 budget. I think he was in the assembly then, and it was because they were building a bike trail in New Richmond, and it was a very specific situation with a couple of constituents that didn't want the bike trail go by their house, and it was a piece that suspended or pulled bike trails and walking trails out of the eminent domain language that is in the statutes, that is the language that is used in a number of situations, whether it's a road going through or but it's the process by which we value like the greater good over something. Right. We've got to get this done. Maybe it's a road or a sewer project or something. versus the individual property owner. And that was put in that budget item. But the ramifications of it were that it shut down a whole bunch of bike trails across the state. The quick reading I did looked like close to 20. There were a bunch of different grants that were at risk. It's that kind of, all right, so now we have that. That is law that happened in the state is still there. We still have that very specific, except for bike trails and walking paths, eminent domain can't be used for those things. So it's a barrier to building that. It affected our tourist industry. It affected a lot of folks weren't happy about it. It kind of ricocheted out through things. Now maybe that was unintentional. Maybe it wasn't. I don't know. But that's the kind of thing I think you have to really look at the long-term ramifications of what looks like a small change that could actually be a big change. Okay. That's the kind of context I like to bring to my thinking. I'm aware of that from the work I've done in the past. Like I talked about before in a different legislature, you have to really think about
avoiding unintended consequences.
Avoiding unintended consequences, because it's kind of tough to get back out of them sometimes.
Sure. Well, Paul, I see that we're already over time. I appreciate your time. We could talk for another half hour.
We could.
So we've been talking to Paul Hambleton. I want to thank you, Paul, for being on the show. Good luck with the election coming up on November 5th. And I just want to remind our viewers to please get out there and vote, read up on the candidates, and keep watching.